So often I've asked the question, what actually is domestic violence? What actually is abuse? And I think certainly we think black eye or split lip, broken arm. It's something we can point to. It's a bruise on my cheek. It's hair pulled. But the thing that is so tricky is that there are different kinds of abuse. There are different choices of weapon. We can imagine physical abuse. We can imagine sexual abuse, which is very, very prevalent within intimate partner relationships. But it's the emotional abuse. In fact, I often at places like Genesis, we tell women, if you ever get to pick between a broken heart and a broken arm, take the broken arm. That's 8 weeks to heal. But before he ever swings that first punch, what he will do is tell her perhaps that she is ugly and stupid and fat and can't cook and is a bad lover and is a bad mother and she's so lucky to have him. It's the systematic chipping away and almost, it's very similar to what we call the grooming process with regards to pedophiles. It's very intentional, and it just begins to chip away at who she is and her feelings of self-worth, which can then not only precipitate, but when he does swing that first punch, it's as calculated as anything, and she's not the person she used to be. I heard a police officer say one time, somebody can break into your house if they have enough time, and they're interested enough to do it. But if they get to a house where in fact they see a deadbolt lock and an alarm system and a German Shepherd in the kitchen floor, they're going to go next door where there is no dog and alarm system and double deadbolt lock. And I think that the same holds true with perpetrators of intimate partner violence, perpetrators of this power and control. If they see a woman who has emotionally a deadbolt and an alarm system, he would move to someone who perhaps does not have those same kinds of safety mechanisms in place. So to take someone who doesn't have the alarm system in place and begin to chip away and chip away and chip away, that by the time that abuse does happen, even though it may be disguised at the beginning of, oh, I had a hard day, or honey, I had too much to drink, or I'm so sorry, even when all of that clears, the dust clears away, and that abuse happens, she doesn't have the tools to then perhaps fight back as someone who might not. But I'm often asked, well then, what does that look like? We can imagine name calling, and that doesn't feel good, and that feels verbally abusive to us. But not long ago, I read a book. It's called the Verbally Abusive Relationship, The Verbally Abusive Relationship by Patricia Evans. And if you don't have that in your center, I highly recommend it. And it helped me define what is verbal abuse. Everybody can argue. Every relationship probably, I haven't seen one that doesn't, argues. But if my husband and I argue, and he's a gentleman, if my husband and I argue, we're arguing about a thing. He wants a dog, I don't want a dog. Well, the other dog, we're starting to argue now. The other dog is lonely during the day. Well, I work all day. I don't want to clean up after another dog. We have no business with 2 dogs, so on and so forth. We're arguing about a thing. Or he likes, big government and I like small government. There is a topic. There's a start and there is closure to it. The argument about the dog will end because we either get a dog or we don't, right? But where there is, when it becomes emotionally or verbally abusive, is that there is no topic. The abuse itself is what you're arguing about. It is not only name calling, but comments of, it's these explosions that you really can't see coming, and the victim cannot stop them, according to Evans in this book. But it may be that you're worthless, you have no point, nobody else would have you, you're lucky I will take you. Well, that's not an argument. That is just somebody berating somebody else. And that doesn't have to just come from a spouse. That can be a parent on a child. That can be a brother on a sister. That can be in any kind of intimate partner relationship. The stake in the ground is we're not arguing about anything. And that's where it becomes verbally abusive. The anger explosion also often comes from personal powerlessness. Not long ago, I heard a story from a client of ours that she and her husband were actually traveling to Houston to visit the grandchildren, and they stopped on on the road to get some gas, and the husband got out. Everything was great. They were having a great day. Everything was just fine. And as he put in his credit card to swipe to get the gas, he pulled it out too quickly, and so it wasn't red. And it said, try again. He did it again, but again he pulled it out too quickly. And then he just started pumping away at it, and the machine shut it down and said, invalid, we're not going to do this anymore. So all of a sudden now the guy is really worked up. He's mad at the machine. He's yelling at a gas pump, yelling at a gas pump, and then some kid who is just sweeping the front yard of the gas station, and then he gets back in the car. And the conversation did not go, gas pumps can be so aggravating. It was, you are so stupid, you should have filled up the tank, I can't believe you aren't supporting me on this. And off went this argument that she had nothing, she couldn't start it, and she couldn't stop it. And it comes from a place of personal powerlessness where the perpetrator of this kind of rage is not able to, they feel so badly about themselves, even though that would not be something they could articulate, that all of a sudden it is then dumped on this person that is supposedly is the closest to them, the person they care the most about. I think the verbal abuse, it can often be a precursor to the physical abuse. It doesn't necessarily happen to. I've never seen anyone be beaten that didn't happen before, but we do know that there are women who experience a lifetime of having pieces of themselves just chipped away and never are battered because it never was necessary to batter. The power and the control was able to be accomplished with the verbal spews. But in the case of that, you'll notice there was no stop, there was no issue, there was no it, as opposed to the story of let's get a dog or not get a dog. So the verbal abuse can be very, very damaging, and certainly it sets a tone in the house where of fear, of constantly walking on eggshells, and that's just truly not a way to live. I was doing some training for 911 operators, emergency operators, and at the break, one of the women said, he's never hit me, but when he's angry, he puts his fist through the wall and breaks the sheetrock. And of course that's typically followed by, aren't you lucky I've never hit you? A lot of women get bashed around. I don't do that. I hit the sheetrock. Aren't I a great guy? And the truth of the matter is, when I asked her about did she have children, and small sons are watching this. We're teaching our children how to resolve conflict by putting our hands through the sheetrock. That is not a normal response to frustration or to anger. So we definitely want to be aware of the signs of the verbal abuse and understand that is a gateway drug into the physical abuse, which is a gateway drug into homicide. We know that these are not isolated incidences, and this is a great thing to help patients understand, is that we think almost as if we're charting the history of the United States. There was the, colonies, and there were the state war, state land issues, and there was, these things that have happened from the Oklahoma City bombing to the 9/11 in New York to Katrina. We think of these in isolated incidents in the history of United States. But the truth of the matter is that is not what a violent relationship is like. These assaults, the push, the shove, the slap, the shove down the stairs, the hair pulling, those are not isolated incidents. We know that this is not linear, that if we could attach the two ends of this, we would see what we call a cycle of the behavior, where there are distinct phases of tension building to the assault, the violence, followed by typical behavior, which we call honeymoon period. This honeymoon period is a time of apologies or gifts, or we'll go to church together, or let me pick up the carpool, I'll run to the grocery store, here are flowers, a night out, and usually promises that this will never happen again. What we know is, however, that because this is cyclical behavior, it will happen again, and it will increase in frequency, and it will increase in severity. So do not ignore a bruise on the back of someone's neck. Do not ignore a slap in the face, because that is what will increase in frequency and in severity. I also would love for you all to understand an issue that is sort of rising to the focus in the field of domestic violence, and that's strangulation. Many people use the word choking. Have you ever been choked? If you're doing a history and physical, have you ever been choked? Choking is actually not the right term. Choking is internal, like I choke on a chicken bone or I choke on something I've eaten or coughing or something. Strangulation is not death. It is the obvious sign that I can kill you. Strangulation is someone's hands on your throat cutting off air supply to the brain. Now, if you went to Genesis Women's Shelter or any battered women's shelter across the United States today and you asked how many of you have been strangled, the running average is about 85%. And what we think is, okay, well, there's no bruising. The bruise on her neck healed. There were a few blood vessels broken in her eyes. You need to hear that if there is any outward sign, if there's a blood vessel broken in her eye, then there has been, it's called petechiae, there has been petechiae on the brain as well. The interesting fact about this is the blood vessel in my eye will heal, my brain does not. So we are seeing permanent brain damage of women who experience strangulation in their violent relationships. So I would highly recommend, if you're looking at signs and signals, in fact, many police departments have actually adopted a lethality assessment program where they ask questions like, are there weapons in the house? Does he force you to have sex? Are there any children who biologically are not his? And that seems to be a big lethality flag. I don't understand it, but it is. But one of them is, have you ever been strangled? And that jumps the lethality up tremendously. So those are kinds of questions that I would be asking all patients, not those you just suspect, but are you safe in your home? Has anyone ever strangled you? Has anyone ever abused you? Are you ever afraid in your own home? Those are the kinds of questions that could be very helpful to this woman and her health, the health of herself and the health of her unborn child.